WRL Sky 5 was able to get into the air above the mountains today, giving us a look at the damage from some of the area's biggest landmarks, from Tweetsie Railroad.
We're getting our first look at the damage in Mitchell County over this, and as in many of the mountain towns in western North Carolina.
Well, some small communities across western North Carolina are waking up to another day of cleanup, 10 days after Helene made landfall.
This morning, more local organizations are joining the recovery process for our neighbors.
Well, when we got up that morning, one of the main reasons we got up when we did was because there was a lot of trees falling around the house, so you could actually hear them falling and hitting the ground. And of course, Steve was at all the windows looking to see where the next one was going to fall. And we were upstairs in the house. We have just an upstairs and then a basement. And we had watched, that happening. And my granddaughter that lives with us, Michaela, she's 19. She was getting very uneasy, and she's bad to have anxiety anyway. And so when some of the trees were falling nearer to the house, she said something about going somewhere else. And we kind of talked about it and didn't know what to do. And I said, well, they always say to go to the basement. That, that's where you go when the storm comes. That's the safest place to go. So from our upstairs to the basement is a spiral staircase. So we took the two smallest dogs with us and went down to the basement. And I come back up and got some refreshments and stuff because I thought, well, we're going to be down there a while. We've got to have something down there with us while we're waiting. She took her favorite blanket, and we could hear the trees outside of the basement falling, and I could see them. And the last ones I remember seeing, they were falling away from the basement toward the field that's near the house. So I didn't really, it was a little upsetting, but it wasn't that scary because I seen the way they were falling. But they were coming down pretty quick, and they were big trees. Not any of these trees were small. And so Michaela was laying beside me, and I was leaning up against a chest of drawers that was down in the basement, and she was beside me, laying on her blanket. And I said, Michaela, we really need to pray to God to send his angels to protect us.
I always get up early, so I'm an early riser, but probably 4:30, 5 o'clock I was up. Power's still on. About 6 o'clock, I couldn't really see. I knew it was, raining, and it'd been raining for a couple of days or whatever, but so I just I thought, well, I'll turn the news on, see kind of what's happening there. And of course, Asheville, they're talking about flooding and all that. It was somewhere around 6:30 is like the power goes out, everything goes out, no phone, cell phones were gone, nothing was happening. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And as the sun came up and you could look out, we were looking out right on the lower street and onto the river, but it hadn't come into town yet on Friday morning. It had gone over into the ball field, which it always does when it floods in Spruce Pine. Over the years, it's done that several times. So I didn't really, honestly, we've never seen anything like this, so we wasn't prepared for it to be that bad. I know Chase, our son, had told us on Wednesday or Thursday that this is going to be bad.
Actually, he had posted on Facebook, I guess it was probably on Wednesday, and had said something to the effect that, this was saying, I believe this is really going to be bad. And if you live anywhere near water, you need to prepare, you need to leave, and all that. Well, my first instinct was to call him and say, because I had people, texting me saying, well, I saw where Chase posted this on Facebook. And so I called Chase and I said, Chase, you're scaring people to death. take that down.
So we had him take it off the
And
Facebook.
and he took it down. And now looking back on that, I'm thinking, well, I probably should have not done that and just left it.
And I think what actually happened as the day, it just kept raining this whole time. And as the day progressed, the water got deeper and deeper, and it kept going towards the Pine Bridge side. But I think it went as far as it could go, and then it began to back up towards town. And it was probably around lunchtime, around 12, and we were, I think Chase was back down there, and we were down on the sidewalk in front of the church, and I looked down at the end of town, kind of down around Hef's and Gastropub, and I said, is that water coming across the street? And Teresa said, I don't think so. And we kept looking at it, and a little bit I said, I think that's water. And then over the next, it was a real slow process, once we realized that it was coming into town and it was coming on up the street. It's like it started at the lower end and then just came up the street.
I don't think any of us really understood what was really coming. The emergency services personnel, the mayor of Bakersville, and I think the 911 communications and all those had some kind of a meeting at 4 or 4:30 that evening and really tried to warn the departments, saying, look, we're not seeing much yet, but this could really, really be bad. And I heard rumors of it, and I guess there's a little bit of a smugness in living in the mountains. These mountains kind of wrap you in and hug you and hold you tight, and the terrain itself breaks up tornadoes and breaks up hurricanes, and we've had wind events, but we never really had any kind of devastation here in the 16 years that I've been here, 17 years or so that I've been here. So, I kind of was frankly, just a little bit on the cocky side about it. Was like, there's a whole lot of hoopla. And so the evening before really wasn't much unlike today. The fog rolled in. It was real kind of ominous and quiet and foggy, and then the wind started picking up. And I went to bed thinking, I'll get up at 2 o'clock in the morning or so and see what it looks like. And I slept till I think it was 4:30 or 5 when I woke up, and the wind was just really starting to pick up well. And by 6:30 or 7, I'm sitting in the kitchen, and the wind is howling. It sounds like a train. My kids wake up, and my wife gets up, and they're like, we're going to the basement. and I'm like, no, I'm not going to the basement. I'm sitting right here. I'm going to watch this thing go down. So I'm sitting at my dining room table looking out my kitchen window, and we've got these big pine trees at the back border of our property. There's probably 14, 15 of them all in a row. And I knew that in the past they'd been a real good windbreak for us on high wind events. And I was like, if one of them starts going, the rest of them are going to go. So I'm sitting there watching the trees, and coming to 7:30, 8 o'clock, the wind was just horizontal. It was just howling, and you could hardly hear anything but the wind. It was plastering little bits of greenery, leaves, and vegetative debris up against the neighbor's house, and just water was everywhere. There's water coming through my roof in places where it never come through the roof before, because it was going horizontal and being driven by the rain. And so all of a sudden I can't hear them. I hear just a kind of a empty crack. I can't really hear the trees fall, but it's just slow motion, one after the other, they just start going. Fortunately for me, there's a tree that fell in and wove itself between 6 of them, like a zigzag. Fell right down between them, and that lateral brace kept the rest of them from going, and actually we didn't get a whole lot of damage. Got a little bit of roof damage on my outbuilding. But at that point I knew it was severe, and there was no way really. You look out the road and you could see the water running down the street, and there was a lot of water running down the street, and that's not typical. But I was like, really wonder how much rain's falling, because the wind looked like it was the bigger factor, but there was a lot of rain, and water was running everywhere. Around 9:30, it started tapering off a little bit, I think, if I remember correctly. And I told the girls, I said, I want to see what's up with the town. And so we got in the truck, and I think it was around 10, we actually got on the road and drove down the lower street, and the water was still coming up. And met Mike and Teresa Thomas on Lower Street, and the water was right up at the Henley Art Gallery. It was right at the door, or very close to the door. And at that point, I think the walk bridge was still intact. And so we went on down, crossed the bridge on Highland Avenue, stood on the bridge for a while. The whole bridge was shaking.
When we all got to the police department after the storm hit, got all my guys there, and it was total blackout. I mean, for us, you know, when you come in and you check on, you're talking to our dispatch there in Bakersfield, or if you get a call and you're working with somebody, you know, at least you have your radio. Well, in this situation, we had nothing. There was no radios, no cell service, the towers were down. So that was something a big adjustment, because, you know, to be able to check on people, to be able to know what you're doing, you know, we're in this world of technology where you can just pick your phone up, or you can just go on the radio and do that. Well, at this point, you're back to Stone Age. You know, you're having to, you know, you do everything before you leave, because once you leave, you can't talk to somebody else. And so that's kind of what it was. We put a plan together. We put chainsaws and stuff in the back of our cars, which is something we've never done before. And then we went street to street to just go door to door to check on people. You know, we didn't know who was hurt. We didn't know who needed help. All we knew was we couldn't get a hold of anybody. And so we did that. There's 13 of us in our department. So we broke up in groups, and we just started going out door to door, checking on people. And then what we would do is we would check on, you would do a street, and when they checked on one street, you would check every residence on that street. And we started out putting like ribbons or something on the front of the street to show, hey, that's been checked. So we did that for probably 2 days. We had, you know, officers sleeping inside the police department, which there's no power. At that time, the only place that had power was the fire department. That was kind of the main hub there for any of the emergency response people. And, you know, it was just amazing to see the damage and, you know, in the small town that we have. There's a lot of water that runs through our town. And, you know, there was water coming up in places that I've never seen water. There was, you know, I'll never forget when I first got there, I went on the Mitchell News Journal side of Lower Street, and I come in from where the barbershop is and came down, and I got probably halfway down, and of course the bridge there from town to Pine Bridge was gone, completely gone, which is just totally, my eyes, just amazing that that's a possibility. But you could just see water. You couldn't see the park. You couldn't see anything, just water straight across to where the old Pine Bridge building was. And, you know, you could see the depot. You could see probably 5 foot at the top of the depot. That was it. Everything else was underwater. It was amazing. I mean, it's just something that, you know, in my lifetime, hopefully we'll never have to see again. But
I heard a tree falling. I could hear it cracking and starting to fall. And so I jumped on top of Michaela. It wasn't like a jump from a standing position because we were both sitting on the floor, but I rolled over on top of Michaela. And then I knew a tree had come down on top of us. And at first I could hear Steve screaming. He was at the top of the stairs. And I thought Steve had got hurt because the tree had fell in his direction. And so I seen a light at the bottom of my feet up under the debris that had fallen on top of us. And so I told Michaela, I said, get out of here. Because she could get through there. I knew I couldn't because it was a small opening. And so I sent her out that opening. And so she went on up the stairs. Steve come down there and he was trying to get the debris off of me. And it's funny because none of it was touching me. Not any of it. And he was trying to get it off and he couldn't lift anything. It was the tree plus the debris. And so So I thought, well, maybe I can move something, so I can get out. And by that time I was laying out flat. I wasn't sitting up, I was laying out flat. And so I lifted my hands up, and I could only go this far to feel the debris. I couldn't go any further. And of course, I couldn't even budge it. It was so heavy, I couldn't even budge it. And Steve was still running crazy and hollering and, trying to help us. And Michaela was on the phone trying to call 911 and couldn't get through. Of course, the lines were down. There was, no way you could get through. And I wasn't scared. That's just kind of the strange part to me about it, in a way, was I had no fear. I didn't have a fear that come over me. Even though Steve was very upset, I didn't feel fear. I felt a calmness. And I knew I had to get out of there. I mean, that was obvious. But I wasn't scared that any of that would continue falling on me. I knew I wasn't hurt. I couldn't feel, any pressure or anything on me or I was hurting anywhere. But, so I looked and I didn't see anything to my left, a way to get out. So I looked to my right and there was a light. And I know now that was God's light. And he was showing me how to get out of there. And it wasn't real close, but it was close enough that I just lay down like I was on my back, and I just started scooting on my back and kept scooting. I kept telling Steve, I'm all right, I'll be okay, and I'm gonna get out. And I kept scooting till I seen the light, and I knew the light meant that there was an opening to get outside. And so I crawled out that way. I scooted out on my back and got out that way, and by that time, Steve knew we were okay, that we weren't hurt.
By the time it actually got to us, it was just pouring in. And so we realized the blankets and bedspreads wasn't working. The church is on the ground, street level, and then we're on the second floor up. So actually, throughout the whole day, if we wasn't outside, we were just sitting there in the apartment looking out. It was such
I pulled
overwhelming.
a chair up to the
window.
And I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, because actually we couldn't see the river from our apartment
because of the trees.
Because of the trees. We barely had a view of the river. So, as it progressed and the water kept coming and all the trees were going down, and it was like it was just hard to believe, there was just tree after tree after tree going down this river. And then we started seeing cars, trucks, these big ice boxes, that sit outside
of a store.
So, and then later on, there was a house that went down.
It was fully intact.
It looked to be mostly intact anyway. And the reason that we remember it so good, I think, is because it was a pretty house. It had a stained glass window in the eave, and we were just like, is this really happening?
But you're so...
And we watched, I will tell you, that as we watched the water come up in town, we watched cars that were sitting in town. Down there, there was like 2 or 3 that were sitting
that just
in front
went
of the
underwater.
Mexican restaurant, and one beside of the depot, and we just watched those, the water come, and then here they'd start floating away, or floating into the buildings. So
it was just, but it was such a, you were so helpless. That's the only word I can even, it's like, I think it brings reality to, we put so much value in what we do and all the things that we have and all the stuff. And you're sitting there in slow motion almost and watching everything just come to nothing. It was so, and it even for days after it's over, it's like we were just in shock. And it was hard to ever really get a grasp of how you felt. There was one day, several days down the road, that I just got real kind of, I don't know. I'm not one to get depressed or anything like that, but it was just sad. It was depressing, and you felt so overwhelmed.
There was containers, shipping containers floating down the river, and we saw the oil, a couple of the oil barrels and storage tanks at it's not Guge's oil, the other one, Tri-County oil, teeter and roll undersides, and it smelled like diesel fuel. Everything smelled like diesel fuel, and said, "Girls, this is going to take a long time to clean up." And way back, the water came up some more. By that time, the water was on top of the roof of J.J. Guge's offices and was in Ingalls. It was probably a foot and a half or 2 feet in the Ingalls doors. And we're coming back through town, and I was looking at our infrastructure. There's water spraying off the hill behind what used to be the Phillips building. And there's water running out of some of the banks. And I knew we had, because there were root balls that were toppled over. I knew we had busted water lines all over the place. And so it took, that day was, for me, was more survey and damage as I could, because you couldn't go everywhere. We couldn't go out to Pass, obviously. Didn't go out much toward Avery County at that point. I went up toward Beaver Creek just a little, and that stuff was all tore up there. We couldn't get up Beaver Creek hardly at all when the water was up. And so I basically looked at my family and said, well, we're probably not going to have electricity for a while. We're probably not going to have water for a while. We're probably going to be dark for a little while. There was no cell phone service at that point. Everything was down. And so I don't think people really realize what happens when you have a county where there's no radio towers left. There's very little comms between fire and emergency services. There's no cell phone towers left, functioning cell phone towers left. Everything is just dark. And, I've been to Africa, I've been to Central America, I've been all over the place. And it kind of reminded me of when I was in Africa, where there was no technology at all, where there was no cell phone service, no technology at all. It was just quiet. It was just, nothing's happening. And so that was the day of the storm. The following day, I had gotten a call the night before the storm from a friend of mine. His name's Dennis. And he said, listen, I've got a mini hoe, I've got chainsaws, I've got skid steer with a grapple bucket. If this thing actually is as bad as what it sounds like it's going to be, I want to just offer you all of my equipment and my time. And he said, wherever you point me to go, I'll go. And so the day after, at this point, I still didn't fully realize, the first day I still didn't really realize that all of our roads into Mitchell County were closed. Iron Mountain was closed, Roan Mountain was closed. That really wouldn't have been a good route in anyway, but 3 Mile was closed, Mullen Hill 3 Mile was closed, and then Cox's Creek was closed, 226, 221. And so I have a good friend who's since deceased, but his name is Ken Slavon. He was out of the county on business when the storm happened, and he got flown in, I think it was the second day. And by the time he got on the ground, he had called a bunch of people, because he still had access to internet and cell phone service. He had called a bunch of NGOs and had told them, listen, we got a real situation happening in Mitchell County, North Carolina, and we'd like to have your support. And I think by the third day, they were pledging a truckload of water and food a day between a couple of NGOs. And so, but back to the second day. Second day, I showed up at the fire station because I didn't know where else to go. And everybody there was scrambling. There really wasn't a good direction to go. They had a generator, and because there was a generator, they had light, and they were cooking for the fire and EMS teams. And there was a little bit of talk. Fortunately, Bill Hogue had already put in the night before. He'd stayed up till about 4 o'clock in the morning, and he'd put in a whole bunch of web EOC requests, which is basically an emergency request after a state of emergency is declared. Emergency requests go to the county, and then from there they get kicked off to the state, and from there they get kicked off to the federal government, depending on who can fill the need. And so you had fuel there. By the second morning, there were fuel tankers at the fire station. And Dennis showed up there with me, and he had his truck, he had his trailer, he had his little mini hoe on the back of his truck, or on his trailer. And fire department had a bunch of chainsaws and had chainsaw oil. I had thrown my chainsaw in the back of my truck. And we started that first week, the first 4 or 5 days, Basically anywhere that Bill Hogue, EMS, Bill Hogue's with the fire department, EMS or the mayor pointed us to go to open up roads, that's what we did.
Growing up here and living here my whole life, and to see what I saw as far as the damage and the people that lost everything. It's, you see on the news all these natural disasters and these places that hurricanes and all that hit. But to actually be inside this and to be part of this, it's almost unbelievable that you're there, and and me being the position of the chief, being the position I'm in, there's a bigger responsibility for me to make sure that I'm doing everything I can, and my guys are making sure they're doing everything they can to help as many people as we can. And it was, there's some things that we did that I know we'll never do again. One example would be with the sewer and everything being completely out, the Mitchell house. I mean, that was the craziest thing in the world. They were evacuating the Mitchell house, which is a nursing home there in Grassy Creek. I think they had maybe 45 patients there, and they were going to evacuate them to, I think, a nursing home in Mount Airy. I think is where they ended up taking them. But we had Blackhawks come into the Walmart parking lot. We had to clear out the parking lot in Walmart, and we had Blackhawks coming in, ambulances bringing out patients, 4 or 5 patients at a time. We were loading them onto the Blackhawks. They were going out, and then one was coming in. We was loading them up and stuff like that. In the middle of that, we're trying to get that going, and then all of a sudden we get a call about they were doing an emergency drop right in the middle of the road on NC 226-19, the big intersection there at Burleson Hill. There was a small helicopter needing to do an emergency drop for the hospital. And they were needing, the road cleared and everything. So we're having to take half our guys, hurry. I mean, it was circling at the time. They needed to drop now. So we're having to hurry and rush, get our cars down there. They drop it. It was insulin and other stuff that the hospital needed. So it's just stuff like that, probably never do again in my career. And it's just things that stick in your mind like that will never goes away. I mean, I'll always remember. So,
that's wild.
Yeah.
Did y'all do any search, rescue, recovery?
We did. That was it was chaotic at first because, like I said, the communication part, that's key to anything you do is having good communication. But when you've got the whole county and the whole city together and it's total chaos there, you just got to take care of your own. So with us, we had the city limits to make sure we're finding people. So what we did is we went door to door, but then after we checked all of the houses that we thought we'd got to in the town, then we went to, Alpass, went to the river, and we had officers walk the edge of the river looking for people. At that time, even on Lower Street there were tons of cars sitting in the middle of the river right there at Lower Street at the bridge at the railroad tracks. So it was literally 24/7 checking on people. I mean, and the good thing is you kind of get an idea too of how many people live in town and how many people, you see the houses and all this, but when you have to literally go door to door and talk to say, hey, is your people here? Is your people there? And I'd say the hardest part would have been when the phone or when dispatch started getting some signal back. I mean, that's days after, was you had all these family members calling and all these family members sending text or through Facebook and saying, hey, can you check on my grandma? Or can you check, we live in New Mexico. My parents, I've not talked to them in 4 days. Can you check on them? So it was a continuous, we had a checklist. We had, people that we needed to check on that people had called about. So we had to go to that house, check them off, then go back and try to get back with their family members. And, that was days and days of doing stuff like that.
So I got out, and of course I grabbed one dog. One dog took off, and I couldn't get him, and got up to the top of the stairs. And then I realized really how bad it was, because the tree was 40 foot. It was huge. It was huge. And it had landed exactly where we were laying. There was a dresser, I said, that, I was laying against. That dresser, between the dresser and me was the tree. And there was a little stool sitting beside of me that was down there. It was, it was about this stool. And it had moved. It had moved it on away from where I was. And so I got upstairs and seen that we were both okay. Knew we couldn't get in touch with anybody, to tell anybody anything. And trees were still falling. They were falling. They had taken away, that tree that had fallen had taken away my bedroom, our closet, the basement, had completely taken the basement. It had crushed just about every cement block that the basement was built. Taken 2 cars. Steve's truck was parked the nearest to the tree, but it didn't mess it up. It came out unharmed, but it took our Tahoe and it took our Subaru, and then our granddaughter's car was parked beyond that, and it got damaged. It's drivable. And
so when the tree fell, he hit the house. So what fell on you was the tree and the house.
It was yeah. The second floor came down. Yeah, the second floor came down on top of us, but it didn't touch us. So that was God's angels holding it up, and that's the way I picture it. When I try to think about it, I can see the angels holding up everything that fell and kept it from even touching us. Now, Michaela, she had more bruises than I did. I had a few bruises. And of course, it was very nerve-wracking to go through. But she had bruises and scars on her left side. And I think that was for me jumping on top of her, because none of the tree or none of the debris actually hit her. It was where I got on top of her, I guess. I bruised her. But she's fine. I mean, other than she's still very nervous when the wind blows. Rain, the flooding didn't affect us. We had wind, and the wind gust is what gave us our damage, was from the wind gust. But we had probably at least 20 trees around the house, and then all up and down the driveway. We couldn't get out for 3 to 4 days before we could actually get out of the house. We had to walk everywhere until, some people come in and we got some things cleared out. But since then, we have completely cut down all the trees around the house. Michaela would not come home. She stayed at friends and family until all the trees were gone. It just affected her that bad. But they're in the process now of starting to rebuild. That was in September. So we just started rebuilding last week. It's actually just a miracle that none of us got hurt at all. Steve always keeps things like supplies. He always keeps that fulfilled all the time. But no, I'd never been in a hurricane. I didn't think anything about the trees because most of the trees around our house was oak trees, and I thought they were the strongest ones. So I didn't really have that fear. I mean, yeah, there's a possibility trees would fall, but I had no idea that it would be such a disaster as it was.
September 26, 27 were the main events, but 4 days prior to that, we had 4 to 5 inches of rain, but it was the rain. It was the amount of rain that was so devastating that caused catastrophic events in this area in the mountains of western North Carolina. We, in Mitchell, Yancey County, probably got the biggest blunt of the rainfall. Busick had anywhere from 30 to 40 inches. National Weather Service reported over 30 inches. Some local people there have reported 40 inches. Busick is only a couple of miles out of Spruce Pine in Yancey County. But the amount of rain that was carried to this area from the ocean was phenomenal. And of course, it's warming oceans that cause those kind of events, that cause those hurricanes and severe hurricanes. And it's that heat. It's the heat that generates that energy. But I calculated the amount of rain that we got. If you take our area, and this is just our area, this doesn't include areas like Swannanoa and those in Black Mountain and Asheville and some of those, but the immediate area of McDowell County, Yancey, Avery, and Mitchell, I measured roughly between Wilson Creek near Grandfather Mountain and Mount Mitchell. And that's about a 20-mile stretch lengthwise along the mountains, along the Continental Divide. Continental Divide runs right through here, basically about where the Blue Ridge Parkway is. And on one side of that, I took 2 miles to either side is my distance from the epicenter, which is the Continental Divide. And these storms just kind of came up and stalled, and because of the pressure drops, just dumped their load of water there. And so if you go 20 miles by 2 miles and you take an average, I used an average of 24 inches of rainfall in that area, and calculate and make that conversion, 70 million tons of water, and that's tons, not gallons, is the equivalent of a concrete block 1,000 feet long, 1,000 feet high, and 1,000 feet wide. So that's a huge amount of weight. That's 700,000 railroad cars of water. And so that's on one side of the Continental Divide. So you got that on both sides, which is about 140,000 train car loads of water. But that's in the eastern side. All of that goes into the Linville River. It goes into the Catawba, the North Catawba and the Catawba. On the west side, that's going into the Tow River and in the Cane Creek and Cane River, which eventually makes its way to the Nolichucky and to the French Broad. So those river systems got the brunt of it. The total of all of that water on the east side went into Lake James, most of it in those river systems. On the west side, it went into Lake Douglas in Tennessee. So those areas were devastated too, but the amounts of rain and the just a total accumulation of that's devastating. That amount of water is unstoppable, especially when it's on a mountainside and it saturates the soil. And once those soils get saturated, they become fluid, semi-fluid. And when they become semi-fluid, they're going to take off by gravity downhill.
When there's nothing else happening, you kind of lose track of time. And this was like 6:30 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. It just, I'd get there at 6 in the morning, eat a little bit of breakfast. The fire department was making breakfast. So we'd get some breakfast. Everybody was coming to the fire department and dropping off the stuff that was in their freezers that was going to thaw out anyway. They were putting it in big ice chests. Fortunately, the fire department had a big ice maker, and they were putting ice on top of everything. And they're like, we may as well eat it. And so by day 3, we had a solid presence. We had, I think, 3 FEMA agents. By day 3, the 4th one arrived on day 4, if I remember correctly. And then we had multiple SAR groups and search and rescue groups, as well as EMS relievers from other departments that came in and so they'd gotten the web EOC requests, and there's large emergency departments in large cities oftentimes have an extreme search and rescue and emergency department. It's packed up and ready to go. They've got cover trailers and trucks and sometimes mules and water rescue gear, all of that ready to go. And so they basically just hooked up to the trucks and rolled. And so they were there. There was probably, I'm guessing there was 80 people at the fire hall. There were people sleeping on the floor. National Guard showed up about day 4. They got choppered in, and so it was a riot those first couple of days, and nobody could get in without flying in or coming in on a 4-wheeler. And so about day 4, about day 3 or 4, actually no, it would have been day 3, because that's the day the FEMA officers showed up. Alan Cook basically sent out word with couriers to all the departments, the county manager, and he basically brought everybody to the Spruce Pine Fire Hall. By day 4, we had a Starlink that somebody from Switzerland had brought in and said, listen, I've got no new use for it. You've got electricity. Let's let you have the Starlink and hook up to it. And so we got Starlink early on. And so I could text message and I could do voice calls over Wi-Fi on day 4. And so Alan was, in my opinion, Alan was a golden boy in the whole thing, and I'll give kudos to him on this. There was a lot of wonderful, in my opinion, management skills that were displayed through under pressure through the whole storm there with him. He basically brought everybody together and he said, look, we're going to meet here at 10 o'clock in the morning and we're going to meet here at 5 o'clock in the evening every day until we have better communication. We have to consolidate communication to one location. Even so, you have an 8-hour delay between times when you can communicate. So if the mayor's going up to check a water reservoir, it might take him 3 hours to get up there under the conditions that they were in. Once he's there, he's got to get back to his vehicle. He's got to drive all the way to the town hall, leave notes for the people at the town and public works department, and then come to the fire department and consolidate those notes. Communication was so slow, desperately slow. And so that whole kind of first week, 10 days were all just so much work. Open up the roads so people that need insulin can get on the road. Somebody can get on the road and get them some insulin. Making sure that people can get some little bit of gas, what little bit of gas there was left or that was available, and open up the main arteries so that there was connection to the fire department. And the fire department became a hub for quite some time. I think it was probably 5 weeks, maybe a little more, that the fire department continued to be, I think it was a little over 3 weeks. The fire department was the hub for communications, and then they moved it to the senior center in Ledger, and continued the meetings from there because it was a little more centrally located. So after I started putting the chainsaw down, a lot of the roads were open. The EMS could get to where they could go. The National Guard was doing house-to-house checks. The SARS teams were doing house-to-house checks. FEMA was flying choppers on a rotation, and they were starting to set up grids. A lot of people don't understand, but they had a grid modeling apparatus that basically showed everywhere where they had checked the hollers around here and the mountains, and had tried to account for all the homes. And when people heard the choppers, if they were in trouble, a lot of them get on their roofs or they get out in the open and they would wave. And I think they airlifted like 14 people in the first couple of weeks out. We did an attempt at airlift over on Franklintown Road. So I think in the first 2 weeks they had 14 people airlifted, and I was personally on one where we had to cut on Franklintown Road. There was an older gentleman who was going septic, and there was a mental health patient, a younger gentleman living with him, and then an older lady, and they were all blocked in. The wind had just literally torn everything up around them. There was trees stacked like poles in the road. They couldn't get out. And so we went in, Dennis and I actually went in. That was one of the last things we did around day 6. And we took the excavator, we found a road, and an old dirt road, logging road or something, and we started cutting this end of the tree, that end of the tree, and dipping them off, throwing the trees off out of the way so that the EMS could get in. And we got fairly close, and then we went up the hill where there wasn't a road, and they used a sled to eventually get them out. Because we got in there, we tried to open it up for the chopper to drop a basket, and there was too much rotor wash with the way the trees were set up. The basket just did this, and they were like, we can't airlift them out, and so we ended up sledding them out,
and really we didn't know what it was like anywhere else. I mean, it was just, I don't know, I can't explain, the feeling being in my job at a time when it first day or so, I really in my mind thought, I'm not sure if we can get through this. I mean, really, it was that kind of devastation. I mean, how can a town, how can we get through this when you see your whole upper and lower street, or lower street, water up to the doors. I mean, you know, in my mind, I was thinking, well, every one of those buildings are going to be condemned. That's half your town right there, business wise. We lost 2-3 vehicles during the storm as far as damage. I mean, totaled out. And for a small town like this, that's huge. But it is amazing to think how resilient mountain people are. I mean, really. I mean, because I would say we're the only people that we take care of ourselves. That there was no, you can call these people, they're coming, somebody's coming at the first couple of days. If you didn't go out, even at my house, like it took me probably 7-8 hours to get from my house to the police department. But that's because people, like from Sabelco, I come out of my house, the bottom of my driveway, and there was probably 6 or 7 people getting off work in Red Hill, coming through, had chainsaws, and for 7 hours we was cutting out, getting on 226 every 100 yards, you're cutting 3-4 trees. And we did that for 7 hours just to get there. So, I mean, but that shows you, what type of people we have around here. I mean, because we can take care of ourselves. I mean, this right here showed. When we've had good help, we've had tremendous groups come in and help. But at the end of the day, when it first hit, it was all us. Yeah. But look at it, we're every day's a better day. That's what I told everybody. Everybody say, "Oh, I know it's awful," but every day's a better day. So,
what was your day like? Getting up, going to work? How were you there?
I was there probably 18, 19 hours a day. I know that for 24 days, I worked 24 days straight, and I would get there 7 o'clock and work till 12, 1 o'clock, something like that. I mean, it was insane. I mean, but it wasn't just me. I mean, that was the thing that, I was really proud of with my whole department was, majority of us have kids, have family. But that's the thing about this job is you still got to, people rely on you. And, being there every day, I ain't gonna lie, the last probably week or so, I was wore out. I was tired because we had done a whole lot of work. I mean, daylight to dark every day. Still recovering from it. A little bit. I mean, honestly, it's we're still rebuilding. We're still trying to figure things out. But yeah, the work days were tough. It was once we started getting supply drops and stuff like that from the National Guard, our job kind of increased because somebody had to get those supplies out. And then, it wasn't for the whole 20-some days that we worked, it was never the real police job that people think, arresting people. It's the helping side of it. And, we would go up, they'd do the supply drops, and we got a truck from Sabelco, and we would use that and a couple of our patrol vehicles, and we'd go and load up, and we'd go to all these apartment complexes, and we would pull up and we would start unloading supplies. I mean, we would go to every house. Now, that's another thing. When we checked the houses, we had to count for everybody that was there, plus what do you need? So like 2 days after that, we would go back, make that list, and then we'd go back and get the supplies to them. So, to say that I was tired, or all of our guys was tired at the end of the day, is just, it was afterthought, I guess.
Steve thought we were dead because he was standing at the top of the stairs watching everything going on and talking to us. And, I mean, he may share with it, but the next thing he seen was the tree coming down and the whole floor coming on top of us. So he thought we were dead. So he wasn't hurt. He was just scared and upset.
At any point did it cross your mind that may be what's happening?
No. I did not think about that we were dying. I never thought that. I wanted Michaela out of there because she's so much tinier. She's really tiny, about 110 pounds. And I wanted her out of there, and since I seen a way for her to get out, I wanted her out because I didn't know if anything else was going to continue falling. I mean, that had failed, but that didn't tell me that nothing else was going to. And so I wanted her out of there. But not one time did it go through my mind that I was going to die. It's like I said, it's just a peace that came over me that you got to get out, but it was not a fear like, this is it, I'm going to die. That never even crossed my mind. And I know God sent that. Because if I had panicked, it might have not been that simple of getting out of there. It makes you not completely realize, but it makes you understand how people can be in service and have to go through bombs and explosions and seeing things happen, and makes you appreciate what they've had to go through. Because that's, they come back and they have these flashbacks and all that. And I can relate to some of that. Not as severe as theirs, I'm sure is. But I can relate to some of it, how it can be upsetting even afterwards.
I don't know why this stood in my mind, but I was out front maybe on Saturday, and this cop car pulled up as a young girl. I mean, probably in her 20s or 30s, but she was a cop, with the sheriff's department in Cabarrus County, I think it was. And they were just up, they were helping and just patrolling the town, and that's awesome. She just said, "Are you guys okay? You got everything? Yeah, you good?" I thought, man, it's so crazy.
I'll tell you one of the things that stands out to me about the people who came in to help. It was on that Monday after the storm on Friday. That Monday we had a group of young men and women from Pennsylvania. I guess they were people that came in there and just started tearing out.
Working,
shoveling the mud and all that. But one thing that stood out to me about that was those Amish women were in there working just as hard.
Had their dresses.
And they had they wore their long dresses, and they had on their caps and all that. And I stood there and watched them go to the porta-johns that they had brought into town for people to use, and I'm thinking, I don't know that I would do that, So I guess that's one reason I say it's, I look at those people and I think, man, that's what people
Some
need
of them
to be
had their
about.
babies on their side working,
Yes,
and
yes.
little children working, and
Yeah.
young children, and crazy. It's crazy. I don't ever want to do it again, but
I try to explain that to my grandchildren because I don't think they understand what they live through.
But
I want it to make an impression on them, so as they get older, they can look back and say, well, I lived through, Helene in
But I tell you one thing I've noticed
2024.
with Ryder and Harper both, when was it? Was it last week when they were talking about the storm? It's kind of putting out the storm and flood, and they were both a little nervous. They were asking questions. So, are we going to be all right? Are trees going to fall? Or, is this going to be okay? So, I mean, it has.
Yeah, it has.
It's put some fear, if nothing else. But
it's just,
in the children.
It was such a significant event. I just want them to realize that what they actually went through and experienced, and what an impact that has had on everyone here.
Yeah, Lord.
So recovery is an interesting word, because recovery to what? That's the question, and I think there's a lot of, early on it seemed like there was a lot of grief around that, because the walk bridge is gone, the parks are gone, Riverbend Park is completely annihilated. Like, there's nothing there to work with except for a big old rock. And so recovery to what? So you have to, it's very easy to see what you don't have based on what you had before, rather than starting to count what you do have and building on what you have towards some kind of a better tomorrow. And so from that perspective, I feel like we've made wonderful strides. It's never going to be the same. it's never going to be the same. Hopefully, it can continue to have the same spirit that it had before, maybe even a little more of a community element baked into it than what we had before. Maybe even a little more helping each other out. I really believe socially that this storm had a net positive for us on how we see our neighbors, how we relate to our neighbors. Really brought the cream to the top in a lot of ways, if you understand that saying. And so in terms of recovery, we still don't have a park. We're getting the park cleaned up, what used to be the park, but it's probably not going to be the same. The bathrooms are going to have to be rebuilt. There needs to be some thought put into how to structure it for the next 20 years. It served us well in the past. We've got a clean slate. And we were able to get some insurance money for some of it. FEMA says they are going to support us on the rest of it, some of it. And so we should be able to rebuild. That shouldn't be an issue. But what do we rebuild, and how is that supposed to look? And we want a new bridge. That was a connector. We want a new park. That was where our kids went to play. You go down there in the middle of town any time of this in the summer, and you heard children's voices. You don't hear it today. And so there's obviously there's still a heaviness, there's still a grief over the community because of that. You're limited in where you can go and what you can do. And the places that when you have your basic needs met, then there's room to put places in that cater to joy, cater to bonding, cater to good memories. Those are the things that are stripped away, or going out to eat places, or a lot of them are gone. Our little pocket park downtown is finally back, and it was all messed up. So there's a lot of that's the kind of the question. People look forward. Some people are looking 6 months down the road. Some people are starting to look back and say, well, why aren't we where we wanted to be? And there's some of that chatter happening in the socials and on the street. And I don't think the average person realizes the amount of energy that got expended. It's like trying to push 3 feet of snow with a snowplow. It just piles up ahead of you. There's more to be done than what you can get done. More to be done than what you have energy to do. And so at some point there's just an exhaustion that comes over you that says, I'm going to have to pace myself if I'm going to survive. And so early on, there's a lot of action. Somewhere in the middle there, people started to say, look, I can't live like this for the rest of my life. I'm going to have to hit a pace. And so things started to normalize a little bit in terms of a pace. I feel like there's wind back in the sails again. I feel like when you see the outfits in the river, cleaning up the riverbanks, when you see the debris getting hauled off, even though it's annoying, even though it takes up the space on our roads, we need to be grateful. Those of us who aren't grateful, we need to be grateful, because that's a good sign. Once that mess is taken care of, maybe we can start, let's try to get that mess taken care of before the weeds and the grass start to grow. Because once it's taken care of, you start weed eating and you start cleaning up, and you can maintain what starts to grow. But anyway, so I feel like recovery is coming along better than I expected, frankly. We were a pretty fragmented community going into this in some ways. And so it was really heartening working inside. It was really heartening to see people who could have been at odds on peripheral issues bond together on the core issues and really make them the main thing. It was wonderful to see. Yeah.
Storm affected everybody. In fact, a lot of things you will hear in conversations, almost everything is referred to as pre-Helene storm and post-Helene storm. Before the storm and after the storm, because it changed. I don't see it did not affect. There was no one that was not affected by the storm. Everybody here that lived through it was affected in some way. Some very negative, with loss of life, great loss of life, and some with great inconveniences. And those were the lucky ones. There was power out in some areas for over a month, and no internet for a month. But it teaches you how to survive and be content without those things, just knowing you have your life. In a lot of the interviews, people will be seen there talking about their house. My house is gone, everything I own is gone, but my family and I are okay, and we thank the Lord for that because everything else is gone. And there are a lot of relief organizations building back, and you see humanity at its greatest when humans come to help devastated humans. And that's pretty awesome. Look at downtown Spruce Pine. It was wiped out. I mean, the buildings are there, but mud was 3 feet thick. And, some people haven't been found. They're still missing people. I'm trying to remember the fellow's name that played the violin. What was it? Lenny Ski. I don't think they found his body yet, and may never. But he lived on the river, and the whole house was washed away with him in it. And he was a really famous fiddle player, and I'd been to some of his concerts, and he was phenomenal. Really good guy. And then we hear there were some news events about they were using cadaver dogs to find people because some of the people were buried in the river, mud, just piles of mud banks. And a cadaver dog alerted, and they were digging down carefully, and they found a man and his daughter buried in the mud, and the daughter still had her hand holding the dad's belt. And they found them in place. Just a horrible death. That she was still clinging to him, and they were buried in that mud. But these things are unstoppable, and they are catastrophic. And even some of the weather reports predicted that this was a life-ending event that was headed this way, but people really found that out later.
It was difficult sometimes because we've seen some bad things. I mean, there were some tough things that we had to see, and there was a lot of devastated people. Lose everything. I mean, that's tough. That's tough to go and say, hey, what can we do for you when you know there's nothing you can do. They've lost everything they've got. But it makes you stronger. I think as a department, and my guys and me, myself, it made us a lot stronger as a person and as police officers. If you could look at it now today, where it's come from, you wouldn't really think it's a huge disaster like it was. I mean, to me, I saw it when it first happened, and like I said earlier, I didn't know if we was going to come through it or not. But I think it's a slow process. I think I'm sure a lot of people have expectations that, this is going to, we're going to be fine in 2 months. We're going to be fine in 3 months. It's a long road, a long recovery. We've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go. But, I can see, even on, if you go down to Lower Street right now, they have cleaned it up. CSX has come in and cleaned all the tracks, all the stuff down there up. It's just going to take time and patience for us to see a big change. Like I said, it's going to be long term. But the recovery's, it's slow, but I can see little pieces of it here and there that we're trying to get back to some normalcy.